What's up, guys? It's Analyst, and we're back again for another episode of our Week 4 matchups this time. Joined again by Luke, as always. And as a reminder, guys, use Underdog. Use code ANALYST, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $500. So it's typically $100. They're running a promo right now where if you use you can use my code ANALYST when you sign up, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $500. If you guys want to go hard on Underdog, we've been doing pretty good with our prop hits on Thursdays for Underdog. Last week we went at 5 out of 6. This week I think we might have hit 3 or 4 out of 6. So not as good as last week, but still we're hitting on those. And if you want to win some money, that would be a perfect time to do so. They also have some cool draft type lobbies. I did a bunch of them last week and I ended up winning some money. So definitely worth checking out. But let's move on to recap of yesterday's game. If you're a Jamar Gibbs owner, you might want to skip to the next part of this because you're not going to be happy about it. But David Montgomery leading the charge with 34 points, 3 touchdowns, over 100 yards on the ground. Luke, is this his backfield to lose? Is this a situation where Jahmyr Gibbs is just not going to be used? We've seen all the memes about the Lions using their 12th overall pick on a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs just to not use him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's just the same thing we saw last year with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, pretty much.
Yep.
I went live last night for about a half hour answering some Thursday night start sits, and I'd been generally telling people 100% I'm sitting Gibbs. If you're starting one of them, you're starting Montgomery. And that's pretty much what I was telling them. I wasn't excited about starting Montgomery either, but there you go, 3 touchdowns. Just kind of feels like we're trending the same exact way we trended last year with Jamal Williams. What did he lead the league in touchdowns last year? Second place, something like that.
Yeah.
It's just, why are you using the 12th overall pick on a player if you're going to use him like this and pay David Montgomery $5 million to run this backfield? I don't get it, but that seems to be the way we're trending, and I'm pretty much done with Gibbs in my lineup at this point.
Yeah, I mean, David Montgomery got 71% of the snaps. Gibbs only got 37. With those 37% of the snaps, it feels very similar to DeAndre Swift last year, where he was uber efficient with the touches that he did get. I mean, he got 40 yards on the ground, I believe, for Gibbs, and he racked up 4 catches, got him just shy of 10 points, even just playing 37% of the snaps and not even getting 10 touches in the game. So you hope that they get to a point where Gibbs starts to see more usage. But I feel like it also has to do with the game script. And this is a game where we just fully, if the Lions are going to blow out the other team, they're just going to keep running the ball. Like, I remember Sam Laporta in this game, I think leading up to the half, he had 9.6 fantasy points. And he was just 4.4 points shy from getting 10. And I have Laporta on one of my teams. I'm like, all right, what are the odds this guy doesn't get one more catch for the entire second half of the game? Turns out he didn't. So he ended up ending the game with 9 points. Kind of disappointing. Amon-Ra still came through and did his thing. On the flip side of the ball, Aaron Jones and Christian Watson were both on a snap count. Aaron Jones got like 2 points in this game. Christian Watson didn't even touch the field in the fourth quarter of that game when they probably needed him the most and they're passing the ball the most. So I think a guy like Romeo Doubs is a guy who I'm going to sell high on. I don't expect this kind of production each week. And Jordan Love, Luke, your guy, we finally got to see him in a primetime game. He kind of reminds me of Eli Manning, and with a little more running upside there. But it seems like Eli Manning in the first, I remember the meme being the first half of games, he just doesn't do anything, and then the second half, especially that fourth quarter, Eli Manning just lights it up, and that's been the game script for Jordan Love over the first 3-4 games at this point. It seems like, I checked the score of the Packers at halftime. They got nothing going on. And then the second half, they somehow either come back and win or they make it close enough to have a good game. So what do we expect from this Packers offense moving forward? Are you buying Christian Watson based on his usage? Do we expect that usage to increase, or are we riding the Romeo Doubs train in this game?
I do expect the usage to increase. He's that big play guy. I mean, last year he was catching like 4 passes a game, but having a touchdown in every single one of them, providing fantasy value. Won me our league last year. Just had him stashed, and that went a long way. So I do expect that to come back at some point, except now with more usage, most likely. I do think it's worth noting that Romeo Doubs was like Jordan Love's guy, I guess, in training camp. He seemed to be his favorite target. I don't think that's necessarily going to play as we continue because this Packers offense looks like something that's going to need more of these big shot plays the run game just doesn't look good especially without Aaron Jones. AJ Dillon was slipping on himself. They couldn't get anything going. I think they only ran the ball 10 times yesterday. So I do think they're going to need more yards through the air. And I think that's Christian Watson's game.
And now David Bakhtiari potentially out for the year with an injury that he suffered. So not good there. But that's the recap of yesterday's game. Now we can jump straight into the games that are coming up, including this first game in London at 9:30, Jaguars Falcons. Last time we saw the Falcons in London, Kyle Pitts had himself
I knew you were going there.
a day. Yeah, I think it was something like 9 catches, 100-something yards, and a touchdown. So Kyle Pitts in London last year was elite. But that's not the only storyline from this game. Drake London, his last name being London, playing in London. We got to keep an eye out for that, obviously. And on the Jaguars side of the ball, Calvin Ridley, his revenge game against the Falcons. I feel like it's not getting enough attention. Calvin Ridley, kind of a bit of a slump the last couple weeks. A good friend of ours, Steve from Fantasy Guys, he does a series called Missing Points, where basically, a missed touchdown catch or falling short of the goal line, he'll include that in this post. And Calvin Ridley has been among the top of these players every single week. It seems like everything just keeps going wrong for Ridley. And if things have gone right, Calvin Ridley might be a top 3 receiver right now. So the volume is there. The opportunity has been there for Ridley each week. They just haven't been able to connect. So is now the time in London as a revenge game against his former team. I'm going to be starting Calvin Ridley in every league I have him this week. So any other thoughts on this game? Any players you're looking at?
I do think I saw a tweet basically along the lines of what you said about Kyle Pitts. I saw a tweet about how he's averaging like 100 yards and a touchdown per game in London and then averaging like 20 yards in every non-London game. I'm thinking that's just a coincidence, but we'll have to wait and see. And then, yeah, as you said, Calvin Ridley, just revenge game. I think the Jags are going to get it right. I was so high on this team coming into the year, and they've come out the gate flat a little bit. They looked good in week 1 against Indianapolis, and then sort of faltered a bit after that, like playing the Chiefs, and then they lost last week as well. It feels like it's going to turn around. I trust Trevor Lawrence and I trust Calvin Ridley to get it right. As you said, Calvin Ridley's been missing a lot of points, a couple of like pass interferences in the end zone, just barely like failed toe taps by inches, things like that I think will start to break in their direction soon.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I actually went to Steve's page and just wanted to check on what I was saying to make sure I'm not going crazy here. But he couldn't haul in a 26-yard touchdown last week. And if he had gotten that, he would have had 16.6 points. That's in week 3. I'm trying to scroll through and find week 2 real quick.
I think there were 2 of them in week 2. I remember seeing his post.
Yeah, so Calvin Ridley couldn't get both feet down on a 4-yard touchdown catch. He couldn't get both feet down on a 16-yard touchdown catch. He had the opportunity for both of those, and he would have had 21 points in week 2. So week 2 and week 3, we would have had 21 points, 16 points, and then he already had that great week 1. We would be talking about Calvin Ridley as if he's one of the top 3 wide receivers in the league right now. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So moving on, we can talk about the Bills versus the Dolphins here. Seems like Jordan Poyer is going to be out for this game. James Cook still seeing a very large workload, so you're going to fire him up in this matchup for sure. Stephon Diggs doing his thing. Gabriel Davis, he's doing a lot with a very little target share. So I think he's still flex worthy. But someone who I like in this game is Dalton Kincaid. I think this is a game where both teams are going to have to air out the ball. It's only a matter of time before Kincaid finally gets his first touchdown. Kind of a weird, weird stomach feeling but I think this is the week that Dalton Kincaid gets his first touchdown, and we start to talk about him as a potential really big waiver wire pickup here. Anyone on the Dolphins side of the ball? So one being Devon Achane, who Luke beat me to the waiver wire to grab him right before last week. Funny story, I had Josh Reynolds on my bench because the person I was playing didn't have a flex play, and I knew at that point Amon-Ra, there was a chance that Amon-Ra wouldn't end up not playing in that game because of a toe injury or whatever it was. So I was holding Josh Reynolds on my bench, and my plan was to drop him and pick up Achane prior to the 1 o'clock games. But once I did that and I went to the waiver wire, lo and behold, Luke already snagged him, and then he had his 50-point game. So Luke's got Devon Achane, and he's playing him against me this week in the league that we're playing against each other. What are your thoughts on Achane? Do you feel confident with him in your lineup? Do you feel confident with Mostert, given the fact that Achane is there? What are your thoughts?
I actually do feel a little bit of confidence with both of them. Obviously, we're not talking the 50 points that they both put up last week. I'm not even talking like RB1 material necessarily from either one of them. But the Dolphins offense has been roaring. I've been telling people pretty much all season I have Tua in a bunch of leagues, and I'm not benching him until this offense puts up a dud. But that goes beyond Tua too. That goes to these running backs. That goes, obviously, you're not benching Tyreek Hill. That goes to Jalen Waddle, who should be back this week, who I think is a very nice buy low candidate. So I do think that both of these running backs are viable options. I think Mostert's the RB1 and Achane's the RB6 right now. I obviously don't think that is sustainable, but they both seem like viable starting options, at least until Jeff Wilson returns and probably muddies this room up a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think too, it's important that, we got Jeff Wilson coming off IR after this week. So that can kind of muddy this backfield even more. I think if both guys have a good game this week, I think I'd be in a position where I'm looking to trade Mostert or Achane, probably trying to sell both those guys high. But let's move into this next game here. So this game is really important because we have a stoppable object meets a movable force. You might hear the popular term unstoppable and, whatever. Little play on words there. I saw that on Twitter. I don't know who I stole that from. But two of the worst teams, not of the worst teams, the two worst teams confidently in the NFL right now, the Bears versus the Broncos. Someone has to come out on top unless they tie, which would be ugly. For the Broncos side of the football, the only player I'm confidently starting is Courtland Sutton, which is wild. And I didn't think we'd be at that point this far in the season, but he's consistently been the team's top target. Jerry Jeudy is just not performing to the level where he's getting those consistent targets. I think Courtland Sutton is the only one I feel comfortable starting on this team. Javonte Williams is getting the large bulk of the carries in this offense, but again, he's just not performing with it. So I guess the matchup against the Bears would be the time to start him, but I just can't do that confidently. So Courtland Sutton, I'm fine starting. On the flip side of the ball, I actually kind of like Roschon Johnson this week. I think he's got a sneaky good matchup against the Broncos. Not sneaky good. It's a good matchup, but he actually started last week for the Bears. He was their starting running back going into the game. He's still getting a healthy amount of touches, which is about 10 for him. And if this offense really wants to find ways to move the ball, the last time the Bears had their best game was week 1, and they still weren't that great, but Roschon Johnson ended up getting 17 points in that game. So I think this is a good matchup. If you're in a desperate situation, Roschon Johnson is going to be in my lineups. Anyone else in this game that you're excited about?
No, definitely not. Can we trust anybody on the Bears? Is there a single person that even in most of your lineups, you would throw him in? I don't think so. Even Justin Fields at this point, I'm sort of in a spot where he needs to show me that he deserves to be in my lineup at this point before I have him in. It's just been so ugly. And I'm hoping this week, at least for Javonte Williams, this is a great matchup for him. They're not going to be losing by 50 points at halftime. Maybe they can run the ball a little bit. You've said he's been getting the majority of the carries, but that's been 10 carries a game. I'm not seeing the workload from him quite yet. Like on a percentage basis, he has a great workload, but it's just not translating to actual touches or production. So I'll probably be out on Javonte if he doesn't produce something for us this week.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these guys are kind of do or die. Like for the Bears, it's like everyone. And for the Broncos, it's really just Jerry Jeudy. Of like, okay, can you even put Jerry Jeudy in your lineup confidently? He ended up getting 13 points last week, a modest number for just racking up some yards and catches over time, but just still not a confident start by any means for anyone in this game. So, moving on to the Browns versus Ravens. Ravens side of the football, they're expected to be missing Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman. Lamar's going to have to throw the ball somewhere because this run defense and this defense overall, this pass rush for the Browns is pretty serious. I think Lamar's going to want to get the ball out quick. I think Mark Andrews is going to have a good game in this matchup. I think Zay Flowers is going to get a healthy amount of targets, but he's going to be pretty locked up by this defense as well. I think Lamar's going to have to scramble a lot more than he'd like. And I don't think any of these running backs are going to be worth touching for this Ravens backfield. Now, I do want to mention that there is a guy available in just about every single league. Unfortunately, not any leagues that I'm in, because I already snagged this guy up in every single one. Keaton Mitchell, undrafted free agent for the Ravens. He beat out Melvin Gordon prior to the season as the team's running back 4 on the depth chart. Obviously, Dobbins went down. Justice Hill, Gus Edwards banged up with injuries. They have Kenyon Drake, who had a bad fumble last week. Melvin Gordon, who's just not the same guy he was. There is an opportunity in this backfield for someone to come in and make a name for themselves. So if Keaton Mitchell, who comes off IR after this week, gets that opportunity, he could turn into something. So if you have an extra bench spot, if you have an IR spot, I think Keaton Mitchell is worth adding, throwing in there, and just kind of seeing what happens. He's a stash right now. He's not a plug-and-play starter by any means, but if he gets opportunity, he's going to be someone that could be very valuable in fantasy football. On the flip side of the ball, what are your thoughts on the Browns? Jerome Ford, we were both against starting him last week. And look, like touchdowns aside, this guy did not produce. All right, 2 touchdowns is just kind of unpredictable for him in this offense. Of course, he would be the one to get like a receiving touchdown and whatnot. But on the ground, he was awful. I think he had like less than 20 yards on the ground. I have to double check that, but I think it was like 12
10
yards.
rushes for 18 yards. I wrote it down. That's exact. I was going to say exactly what you just said. Yes, he was very inefficient on the ground. I think he out-carried Kareem Hunt 2-1. They had the same amount of targets. So that was Kareem Hunt's first week in the build, at least first week in the past month in the building. We know he was there last year. But yeah, it just didn't light a confidence fire in me. I'm not a fan of starting Ford this week either, even against the Ravens, which I guess is a slightly better matchup. I do think you should be starting Amari Cooper. That's probably obvious at this point. And I do think you should be starting Elijah Moore, who sort of feels like a 1A, 1B situation at this point in this offense. They're neck and neck in targets. I think Amari's had 1 more than Elijah Moore two of these weeks, and Elijah Moore had 1 more than Cooper the other week. So they seem to both be getting very heavily targeted. They seem to be who this offense is running through now that Nick Chubb is gone. And those are the pieces of this offense that I want, not Nick Chubb's backup because he's Nick Chubb's backup.
And something else interesting going on too is that Deshaun Watson currently dealing with a shoulder injury. It's questionable whether he's going to be able to play or not. If he doesn't, if he doesn't, Dorian Thompson-Robinson is expected to get the start. He looked fantastic in preseason. I know that a lot of people who are kind of just itching to see him get some real opportunity in this offense, especially because Deshaun Watson has, for the most part, been a little lackluster for this team, especially for what they wanted from him when they signed him. But the latest update I just saw come through my phone is that Watson, who was being talked to in the locker room, expects to suit up and play in this game. But if he doesn't, Dorian Thompson-Robinson says he will be ready to face the Ravens. So regardless, I think Amari Cooper, obviously mentioned, great start. Elijah Moore, flex play if needed. Moving on, we had the Houston Texans versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Texans out of the football. Dameon Pierce finally came through last week. Can he do it again this week against the Steelers? I think he can. I think the Steelers' defense, the run defense, has not been great. Josh Jacobs last week just couldn't get it done, but he really hasn't been able to get anything done this season. On top of that, we saw Pierce finally get involved as pass catcher last week, which I think is key to kind of his value there. And CJ Stroud just keeps looking better and better as the season progresses. Guys like Tank Dell, who I also love this week, are in a really good spot to keep it rolling. Nico Collins. Do we trust Nico Collins? He had an off week last week. Was the first 2 weeks kind of just kind of just up the chance that he able to get those targets and that production, or is it only Tank Dell moving forward? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it was only chance that Nico Collins had such a great first 2 weeks, but I do think that's in part to Tank Dell sort of beginning to get acclimated to this NFL offense. And now that he has been, it looks like he's going to be the new focal point. So I'm not trusting Nico Collins this week, certainly. I'm not really buying into his future stock either. I do think this is a decent matchup where they could both produce if they need to throw the ball a lot, which seems like Steelers like to play close games. So I think the Texans offense will be needing to be on the field a lot. We know how the Steelers defense rolls. TJ Watt, you're going to sack CJ Stroud 3 times, probably, maybe more. Seems like a weekly thing. So I don't think this is a great player matchup, but I think game script wise, Houston's going to have the ball a lot. And I think that's what they're going to need to do to win this game. So Nico Collins, desperate flex, but I'm not trusting him. I'm not excited about it. Tank Dell in my lineups if I have him. Dameon Pierce, I could do without it.
Makes sense. And for the Steelers side of the football, Deontay Johnson is still on IR. Calvin Johnson had a bit of a bigger week last week. Derek Stingley, I believe, is still out for a little bit of time. So I think George Pickens, as much as we weren't against him prior to the start of the season, he's been getting the volume. So as long as that keeps up in this kind of matchup, I'm fine with starting George Pickens this week and probably going forward until Deontay Johnson does return, which makes George Pickens a pretty good sell high candidate if he does have another good game this week. Next game here, we got the Carolina Panthers versus the Vikings. On the Panthers side of the football, Bryce Young expected back for this game. Jonathan Mingo still questionable with the concussion. Adam Thielen, revenge game against the Vikings after having such a huge target share last week. He's had monster games the last 2 weeks. Last week was with Andy Dalton, but I don't expect that to change this week. I think Adam Thielen, I don't want to call him a must start, but if I have him on any of my teams, I'm finding a way to put him in my lineup. Like, he's going to have a huge game this week. He's got the target share going for him. Running back-wise, Miles Sanders did not practice Friday, which leaves the opportunity for a guy like Chuba Hubbard to kind of come in. The Panthers are currently passing to the running backs at a 25% rate, which is like the 5th most rate in the NFL right now. So Chuba Hubbard, if he comes in, I'd call him a decent flex play in a PPR league for sure. And on the opposite side of the ball, what about these Vikings? Cam Akers making his Vikings debut. Are we lowering our expectations on Alexander Mattison, who actually had a pretty good week last week?
I mean, I don't know if it's possible for me to lower my expectations for Alexander Mattison much more. He did fumble again last week for the 4th time this season in 3 games. I'm just fed up with it. I do have him in a dynasty league. He's not in my lineup anymore. I can't do it anymore. I do think Cam Akers is probably going to get fairly involved. He's had a week to sit around. He's been in the Kevin O'Connell offense before. I think by the end of the season, this will be his backfield. But for now, I'm expecting more of a 50-50 type of situation. And if Madison can't do anything with 80% of the snaps, he's not doing anything with 50% of the snaps. So I'm going to lower my expectations if it's possible, even at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think another thing too is that we're going to see kind of like Cam Akers. I think he'll end up taking more of the groundwork. But when it comes to third downs, I think they'll still have Madison on the field for those passing situations. Now, no need to talk about Justin Jefferson. No need to talk about TJ Hawkinson. We know who these guys are. We know that you're putting them in your lineups every week and they're getting the job done. But Jordan Addison, not a very impressive game last week compared to the first 2 matchups. And he's still sitting behind KJ Osborne in terms of opportunity and snaps and things like that. Do you feel comfortable putting Jordan Addison in your lineup against the Panthers? I mean, right now that secondary, they don't have, what is the name of that corner that they have? JC Horn. They don't have JC Horn, and I really don't think they have that many great names in that secondary to cover. We know the Vikings are going to be forced to throw the ball a ton, as they always do, because they're not going to be able to get anything done on the ground. Is that enough to trust Addison as a flex in your lineup?
I don't think so. And if you've noticed the pattern with me and Jordan Addison this season, I'm more of a fan of him in games that the Vikings are playing against teams that have a solid number one corner and a good defensive coordinator who obviously they're not going to stop Justin Jefferson, who's going for 150 yards a game, but try to slow him down and at least force Kirk Cousins to look elsewhere sometimes. And that worked out for the first 2 weeks. Addison scored, I think, in both of those games. And I think he was like the RB9 or the wide receiver 9 through 2 weeks. He dropped off last week. And this is another one where I don't think the Panthers secondary is going to be good enough to even divert Cousins' eyes away from Jefferson at all. So I'm not very high on Addison this week, but that'll be typically my rule of thumb for the future games as well.
I agree. We got another matchup here between two waiver wire running back darlings. We have Zach Moss against Kyren Williams. Not a sentence I thought I would be saying 4 weeks into the NFL season, but here we are. Every year there's one of those. So on the Rams side of the football, Kyren Williams played 100% of the offensive snaps last week. There was some rumors that they're interested in Jonathan Taylor. There was also Sean McVay mentioning that that's not going to happen again with Kyren. He's not going to see 100% of the snaps every single week. That's not the kind of workload that they want to put on his shoulders. So they'll probably get other guys involved who I guess at this point would be Ronnie Rivers. I don't even know who the Rams have behind him at this point. Maybe Zach Evans, get that rookie finally involved. But for the Rams side of the football, until otherwise stated, I think Kyren Williams is a must start each week as of right now. And the Colts, I saw a tweet that the Colts played, I think, the second least amount of man coverage in the entire league, and they have been decimated this season every single week. They just get tossed on every single week. So Puka Nacua, even if he had a little bit more of a down week last week, which is still a great week for fantasy wide receivers, but it wasn't 20 targets. I think this is another week where Puka Nacua is going to show out. And on top of that, Tutu Atwell coming off a huge week. I think he's definitely got some upside as well if you need a flex play. On the other side of the football, Zach Moss. Is Zach Moss a must start? Is he on the same level of Kyren where it's just like, look, they're getting so much volume and they're actually producing with it that we don't have a choice but to start these guys?
Yep. I said it last week. I'll say it again this week. We don't know for sure when/if Jonathan Taylor is going to be back. But until he is, Zach Moss is the guy. That's the only reason he's on your team, and you're starting him at this point until Jonathan Taylor or whatever they do, until the situation gets resolved. This is a good matchup. The Rams defense is not very good. I think this game could be a little bit close and a little bit high scoring because neither of these teams play much defense. I am a little bit nervous that Anthony Richardson could maybe vulture a touchdown or two from Zach Moss. I mean, he's set to return this week. But I still think this matchup is too good to pass up, and I'm playing Moss this week.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's interesting, too, is that this past week, Zach Moss did see a decrease from 98% of the snaps to 76% of the snaps, which is still amazing. But he led the league in touches last week as far as running backs go with 32 touches, which is absolutely insane. You can't bench that kind of production or you can't bench that kind of volume. So he should be in your lineups. Another matchup here, Saints versus Buccaneers, the Jameis Winston revenge game with Derek Carr not expected to play. We got a lot of revenge games this week. But talk to me a little about what you expect for Alvin Kamara. I made a Twitter thread or an X thread more so not too long ago about why I'm selling him high. But what are your thoughts on Alvin Kamara in this matchup? Do you trust Chris Olave and Michael Thomas with Jameis Winston at quarterback?
Definitely trust Chris Olave. I mean, it worked last year with Jameis Winston at quarterback for a little bit at least. I don't see why it won't work this year. I definitely trust Olave. Michael Thomas, slight downgrade, probably more of a flex option for me this week. In that same boat of those other like borderline flex starts that we were talking about. Alvin Kamara, it's a tough conversation because, I mean, I see the comments on these posts that you make, and everyone is laughing. They're like, why are you selling Alvin Kamara? You just held him for 3 weeks. What was the point? Well, the point is that if you have a winning record right now after holding him for 3 weeks, and what did you pick him in the 9th, 10th round in your draft? You can probably trade him for much higher, obviously much higher value than 9th, 10th round. But you could probably trade him for solid starters in a fantasy lineup. And it just comes down to, do you want to bet on him to be the guy that he has been for fantasy owners for all these years? And I don't want to take that bet at this point. The Saints aren't throwing the ball to their running backs, for one thing, this year with Derek Carr. Now, again, you could have an argument that it's because Kamara's not there. But I'd look at the fact that they have 3 good starting caliber wide receivers. They have a decent tight end who's a good option to throw to, and they actually have 3 of them that they like to get involved. I think there's other options, and I don't trust the Saints offensive line to block for him in the run game at this point. There's just too many question marks for me that if I have a winning record and I've been stashing him this whole time, I think I could get more value out of him right now than I will be able to in 3 or 4 weeks.
And the icing on top to all that is the Saints have passed the ball at the second lowest rate to running backs this season with 8.9%. And large part of that has to do with how much they're passing to receivers. They're passing to wide receivers at the highest rate of any team in the NFL right now. So that's just kind of a situation where, is Alvin Kamara going to come in and demand those targets like he did in the past? The situations were so different, and now he's older, and now he's coming off injuries, now he's coming off suspension. Like, he's been through a lot up to this point to where, like you said, if you have a winning record, why take the chance? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Not to mention, he's just been less efficient as a player over the past 2 years to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. On top of that, on the flip side of the ball, last week I was very high in Chris Godwin. He had a good matchup. They were going to be forced to throw the ball. Did not come through. Am I going to punch myself for having confidence in him again this week? But for a very good reason. Mike Evans going against Marshawn Lattimore. Not only is he likely to be ejected in this game because of their history with each other, but Ian Hartitz on Twitter quite some time ago posted Mike Evans in 10 career matchups against Marshawn Lattimore. That's prior to 2022. Okay, ready? So we have one game where he had 0 catches completely against Marshawn. We had another game where he had 1 catch for 3 yards. Another game where he had 1 catch for 2 yards. Another game where he had 1 catch for 13 yards. Another game, 1 catch for 14 yards. Another game for 2 catches for 48 yards. He did have a touchdown in those game. And then 3 more games where he had 5 catches, 55 yards, 4 catches for 86 yards, 4 catches for 64 yards. So his production takes a nosedive against Marshawn Lattimore every time he plays against him. I'm lowering my expectations against Marshawn Lattimore, but based on how he's been playing, it's so hard to take Mike Evans out of your lineup right now. And I feel like we've kind of bit the bullet on that over the last couple of years, where it's like, it's really hard to take Mike Evans out of your lineup, and then he just completely flops against Marshawn Lattimore, which is what would lead me to believe Chris Godwin would have the benefit in the slot at a different receiver position, not seeing Marshawn Lattimore in this matchup. So we'll see. I'm not listing Chris Godwin as a start. I'm not confident in what he's going to be able to do. It's just, again, another opportunity for Chris Godwin, and this is do or die, because if he doesn't produce in this matchup, then it's just not worth it. Rachaad White, I do want to touch on him real quick. Super, super inefficient, but he is still getting all the work in that backfield. I think he's still a volume play at this point, but the Saints have one of the toughest defenses, especially the run defenses in the NFL. So I don't know how confident I would be in starting him.
Yeah, I'm not. I am a Rachaad White owner in a couple of leagues, and I'm not a fan of the way Todd Bowles was talking about him after their last game. I know he fumbled, and Todd Bowles came out the next day and said, "Look, he's trying to do too much out there to the press." It's just like, what inspires a coach to just go to the media and say that about a player? Like, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way and doesn't make me feel great about his future outlook.
Yeah, makes sense. So we'll have to see what comes out there. But next game we'll talk about is the Eagles versus Commanders. Eagles side of the football. DeAndre Swift. This backfield is shaping up to be Swift, running hard behind this offensive line. He'll put up over 100 yards. He'll do what you need to do. This is a good matchup I think they're going to want to run the ball out this game. We saw the Commanders get steamrolled last week by the Bills secondary and by the Bills defense. I think there's going to be a very similar story this week with the Eagles defense. They're going to get Sam Howell and they're going to get him often. So this is going to be a game where the Eagles are just going to run away with the ball. DeAndre Swift, easy must start for me this week against the Commanders, especially on the ground. We saw Kenneth Gainwell come in a lot last week on the third down and on like 2-minute drills and stuff like that. But I don't think there's going to be a need for him in this one. So I like Swift a lot in this matchup. On the flip side of the ball, I'm not starting Brian Robinson. The Magic has kind of run a little dry. In games where the Commanders aren't winning, Brian Robinson saw like a 30% snap share and barely any touches, and he wasn't all that efficient with it either. So I'm going to be sitting Brian Robinson in this matchup against the Eagles. Any wide receivers you're looking for?
The usual, AJ Brown, obviously, Devontae Smith. I'm starting. Do you think it's time to bench Dallas Goedert?
Look, in the world of tight ends, it's tough to say, but based on that Kyle Pitts talk, I have a league in Dynasty where I have Kyle Pitts, I have Dallas Goedert, and I have Dalton Kincaid. And I've been bouncing through Pitts and Kincaid. I haven't even considered Dallas Goedert over those two this week. So it's up to chance, but Dallas Goedert has not produced. I don't think there's going to be a lot of passing volume in this game. So yeah, I think you're right. I think this would be the time to sit Dallas Goedert.
Having Pitts in Dynasty must drive you crazy.
Oh, it does, considering how high of a pick I spent on him. Next up, we got Titans versus Bengals. Derrick Henry completely flopped last week. I think it's a better matchup for him. They just have to hope that they're in a winning game script, or else it's going to be Tyjae Spears for 60% of the game yet again. On the Bengals side of the football, I mean, Joe Burrow looked better last week. Jamar Chase obviously looked a lot better last week. T. Higgins didn't really do much, but I still believe that Jamar Chase is an every week start. That's not really changing for me. I'm just kind of scan over that. Not too much else to say there. But Chargers and Raiders. There are actually some players in this game that we're looking at. Chargers side of the football, Mike Williams down and out for the season with that torn ACL. Other guys are going to have to step in. Austin Eckler, he's hinting that he's going to be playing in this matchup. So if you have Austin Eckler, get excited that you don't have to force Joshua Kelly into your lineup at any point anymore. For the rest of the Chargers, Staley did come out and say that Quentin Johnson is going to see an increased role with Mike Evans out. So I imagine in 11 personnel, which is what they've been running for the most part, we're going to see Quentin Johnson on the field. We're going to see Joshua Palmer, and we're going to see Keenan Allen. So I got Quentin Johnson in a couple leagues. I think he's the long-term priority pickup over Joshua Palmer. But if you need a plug and play right now, Joshua Palmer is going to be your guy. So I like Joshua Palmer in this matchup. I also like Jacoby Myers in this matchup, which is wild because I didn't expect that I would be, again, like things I don't expect to be saying this early.
This was one of our inside jokes of the offseason.
Like, what are the chances Jacoby Myers does something? And I remember, so guys, when it comes to team targets and stuff like that, Luke has been helping a lot with getting the data for all of it, basically, for the team targets. And he sends me a message and he goes, hey, we have Jacoby Myers at 4th in terms of average target share. Are we okay with that? Like, do we not want to count it because he missed the game? Or like, how do we feel about having Jacoby Myers 4th overall for target share? He's got a 32.9% target share this far into the season. He's got a fantastic matchup against the Chargers. This is a team that's forced to throw the ball right now. I don't know. I feel like it's a situation where you kind of have to start Jacoby Myers and just say, fuck it. I don't understand it, but it's happening.
Now, that's exactly what I wrote as well. But I'm going to have to rain on the parade a little bit. Jimmy Garoppolo is still in concussion protocol. What are we doing if Brian Hoyer starts this game?
It's not going to be Aiden O'Donnell?
It seems like Brian Hoyer's the QB2 as of right now, at least.
Interesting. Might maybe pump the brakes a little bit, but I think if anything, they'll still just kind of keep up with, the game, Josh McDaniels' game plan of forcing the ball to Devontae Adams. And if Devontae Adams, like he's got 2 reads and the quarterback drops back. He's got Adams, Jacoby. Nope, Adams is covered, Jacoby. Adams isn't wide open, Jacoby. Like, he's got 2 reads every time he steps out there. So I still would think that Jacoby Myers would be a decent flex play in that situation.
I tend to agree. The average target share leaders you were just talking about in those two games that they've both played, Devontae the whole season has a 39% average target share, and Jacoby Myers is at 33%. So that means in these games that these two play, 3 out of every 4 passes are going their way, which is just a ridiculous number, especially when you have a guy like Josh Jacobs on your team.
Yeah, and you would think in a game like this where they can actually run the ball against the Chargers, they would try to put more of an emphasis early on to run the ball with Josh Jacobs, but it just seems like they're just passing to those two guys. So that's fine. Next game, we got Cowboys versus Patriots. As a Patriots fan, we'll see if we can become the Cardinals this week because it's going to be a tough matchup. Patriots defensively, I think they match up pretty well against the Cowboys. They have Christian Gonzalez, hoping they get some corners back this week because they do have a ton of guys who are injured. Will need extra help covering Brandon Cooks in this matchup, but they'll probably put Gonzalez. They'll probably shadow CeeDee Lamb with him. I think they're pretty well equipped to stop the run game. Tony Pollard isn't exactly a bruiser. It's more so the speed that you have to watch out for. So the Patriots have some speedy linebackers. Not too worried about them. But for the Patriots fantasy-wise, no more Trevon Diggs. Can Mac Jones actually get it done? It just doesn't seem like any of these receivers are getting any type of separation on this offense. Even the tight ends haven't really been all great in that field. So this is going to be a Ramondre and Ezekiel Elliott game. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott revenge / I don't know what to call it, revenge. Yeah, another revenge game. But I think this is just going to be a situation where they just keep trying to get creative with their guys in the backfield. There's probably some Demario Douglas, handoff type, like wide receiver screen type plays. Maybe some Juju screen plays, and then you'll have Zeke and Ramondre catching out of the backfield, running out of the backfield, whatever it is. I think they're going to want to wear down this Cowboys defense, especially that defensive line. So I expect a lot of Ramondre Stevenson. I expect a lot of Ezekiel Elliott in this matchup. But what can we expect from the Cowboys? I mean, Tony Pollard is leading the league in running back touches right now. He's very consistently getting the ball. The snaps are not always there, but it's, he's guaranteed that volume every single week. And the Patriots, although their defense hasn't been top tier, they are pretty good at stopping the run. So what are your thoughts on some of these Cowboys players?
Yeah, Tony Pollard, I mean, you're not taking him out of your lineup, so I feel like it's a bit of an irrelevant question, but I would lower my expectations a little bit, but that's not to say to take him out of your lineup. And I think the CeeDee Lamb situation is going to be interesting because his MO is sort of, he can line up wherever. He can take the slot snaps or the outside snaps. And that, as a result of that, he gets shadowed probably a lot less than other wide receiver ones around the league do. But Bill Belichick's already come out and said that Christian Gonzalez is going to follow him around the field this week. So I think that's going to be an interesting chess match to watch, see how CeeDee responds to being shadowed, especially by a rookie.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting for Bill to come out and say that, because if that's really the case, it kind of allows the Cowboys to put CeeDee Lamb in more motions. You can set up some pick plays if you have Lamb motioning from the left to the right, and then you have a receiver, bunch up and stop Gonzalez on his route, and then CeeDee Lamb's wide open on the right side. Like, if you're creative offensively, knowing that he's going to be shadowed and knowing that CeeDee Lamb is a guy who can line up anywhere, you should be able to create ways to get CeeDee Lamb the ball. Like, it should be fairly easy for the Cowboys to do something like that. It's just going to be a matter of, is that actually true? Are the Patriots going to shadow him the whole game? So we'll see. But right here, 49ers versus Cardinals. Can the Cardinals do it again? Can the Cardinals and Josh Dobbs be that team that surprises everyone? For the Cardinals side of the football, I wasn't high on James Conner last week, obviously because of the matchup against the Cowboys. But how do you feel about him this week? Can you trust him?
I just feel like the 49ers are a tier above. And we talked about it last week with just recapping them playing the Giants. The Giants just didn't get anything done on offense. And if the Giants didn't get anything, the Giants offense is not world beating by any stretch of the imagination. But if they're not going to get anything done, are the Cardinals going to get something done? The only team we've really seen put up a fight against this defense so far was the Rams. And even that wasn't particularly a great game for them. So James Conner, it's about usage with him. And I'm gonna pose the question to you. We talked about Rachaad White in a tough matchup before, James Conner in a tougher matchup. Who are you starting out of the two? I've got them both.
Connor. I think Connor pretty easily. I think because Connor kind of defied the odds last week, and I think this is kind of an underrated offense. Connor's being extremely efficient. I think they find ways to have him be efficient in the run game. So if I have both of those guys, I'm starting Connor semi confidently. But I just really worried about Rachaad White because Rachaad White, even in good matchups, has not been efficient. And that's kind of the difference between him and James Conner in my eyes. Marquise Brown getting a huge target share. I think he's kind of a weekly flex play at this point. And for the 49ers side of the football, Brandon Ayuk expected back for this game. He's a high upside, low floor kind of guy. So fine putting him in my lineup as well. So we got probably the least exciting Sunday night matchup that we've ever seen, other than the fact that Taylor Swift is going to be there. But we have the Jets versus the Chiefs. Jets side of the football. Luke, you mentioned you don't want to take Garrett Wilson out of your lineup. I actually have Garrett Wilson in one of my leagues, and I'm starting him this week. I'm not super confident about it. I'm not super excited about it, but he is still getting targeted a lot. What do we think? If you're a Garrett Wilson owner, what words of encouragement do you have for Garrett Wilson owners right now?
The only thing I can say is exactly what I said to you before we started recording today, which is that for the Jets to take Zach Wilson out of that starting quarterback position, they have to at least one time this season throw the ball. With Robert Saleh keeps coming out and saying Zach Wilson's our quarterback. Zach Wilson's our quarterback, and I get it. He's been terrible in his NFL career so far. So I get their game plan of for 3.5 quarters running the ball, throwing screens, dumping the ball off literally every single play. Because I think they genuinely believe that scoring 6 points on offense and having their defense stop the other team is their best shot at winning. And I don't have a problem with that. My problem is watching them be down by one possession with 2 minutes left in the game, and they're still doing it. Why? Your defense, they're pretty much betting on their defense to come out and force a fumble for a touchdown with under 2 minutes left. It's just inexcusable to me. And I know this is kind of turned into an angry rant, but this is all to say that I think like something's got to give with the Zach Wilson situation. And I don't think they're going to take him out without at least trying one time to see if he can throw the ball down the field. And if that happens, Garrett Wilson's the guy.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett Wilson, even last week, 8 targets, I think it was a 26% target share. So he is still the guy. It's just the efficiency and the willingness to continue to throw the ball has just not been there. So they got to start doing some of that. And the Chiefs don't have the best secondary in the world, so that would really be the time, especially when you have Chris Jones in the middle as a run stopper and just getting that extra pressure on Zach Wilson. They're going to want to get the ball out quick, and they're going to really want to throw the ball because it's just not going to work out to try to run. And on Chiefs side of the football, Isaiah Pacheco, I think he's a decent flex play this week. I mean, last week in a good matchup, he was able to run out the clock and kind of win the rest of that game for them. They ended up using Clyde Edwards-Helaire late in that game, so that's interesting on its own. But yeah, I think Pacheco's decent flex play or low-end RB2 in this matchup as well. And that's really all we can talk about because Travis Kelce's going to do his thing and Patrick Mahomes is going to do his thing. So last matchup, Luke, this is your team. I will give you the floor. Giants versus Seahawks. What are your expectations for this Giants offense? Is Brian Daboll still calling the plays for this team? Because he should be. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, he is insisting that he hasn't called a play this year, actually. So I don't, and all the evidence that we're seeing of he's speaking into the microphone. He's been doing that since last year. I don't know who's calling the plays. I think the whole situation's overblown. I think what we have with this Giants offense is an offense that is going to get out there and do their thing against bad to mediocre defenses, and they're just going to get shut down by these good defenses. It's what we saw from the Cowboys in week 1. It's what we saw from the Niners last week, and it's what we saw from the Cardinals playing hard defense, at least in the first half of week 2. And then that defense just doesn't have the talent. They can't really play off of grit alone. So the Giants offense took over the second half of that game. And that's the offense I'm expecting to see this week. The Seahawks defense has underperformed expectations to this point. I don't have much faith that they're going to turn into this top half defense in the league. I think they're just sort of floating around, hoping Geno Smith can win them games. So for that reason, I like this as an offensive matchup for both sides. So if Saquon Barkley plays, first off, I'm expecting like RB1, maybe RB2 overall performance from him because this is a great matchup. The Giants offense hasn't looked good so far this year. They're going to want to get the ball in his hands. So if he's playing, that's what I'm expecting from him. Darren Waller, this has to be the week. Again, the tough matchups, he hasn't done much in the bad matchups, but against the Cardinals in that second half, he was the focal point. He's the guy they want to get the ball to, and this has got to be the week for him. If he's going to produce for you at all this season, it's got to be now. You got to see it. And then just on the flip side, Kenneth Walker, another great matchup. He's in your lineup every week at this point. And Seahawks receivers should probably be in your lineups too. DK Metcalf, solid low-end wide receiver one option this week. Tyler Lockett, solid flex. And even Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think, can get a little bit involved this week as more of a deeper option.
Not Jake Bobo.
No.
No, not Jake Bobo. Well, all right. That's going to do it. Thank you guys again for checking us out. We'll be back next week with week 5. Reminder to use code ANALYST and Underdog's going to match your first deposit up to $500 for a limited time only. So make sure you take advantage of that. Luke, thank you as always for joining us, and we'll see you next time.